So yeah, it's good to sort of, I guess, take it down a tone and just, like Phil was saying, a bit more of an informal chat and discuss, I guess, just the vibe for this year for SAP development. And I've got Andrew Barnard here who will discuss this with us. Is Jemena. And what's your role there at Jemena?
Is this microphone working? Apparently not. How about we do that one? Thank you, Ben. My role at Jemena is actually a double-edged role at the moment. Up until the end of last year, I was responsible for the development team at Jemena in the SAP space, and now I lead the community of practice in development at Jemena. And we're going through some restructuring, so we're exploring different ways of working. And so my role there now is really not direct reports, but trying to build the community practice mentoring rather than direct master-servant type relationship.
That's good.
It is.
And what brought you into SAP in the first place?
Right. What brought me into SAP in the first place? Well, I could say my wife is responsible for all of this, and that would be true. Her employer at the time hired her from university in, well, I won't say exactly when, but a long time ago, and they confused what she had studied. And they put her on a project where there was a whole lot of COBOL, and she looked at the COBOL and looked at them and went, I'm not sure this is me. And they said, I think we've made a mistake, but we've got this other project starting in something called R2, and nobody else knows anything about it, so you might as well work on that as well. So she came home and said, I'm working on this thing called R2, SAP, nobody knows anything about it, and it looks kind of interesting. And I found myself in a couple of years in the SAP space.
Okay. And where do you find yourself now in SAP, particularly, apart from obviously the role that you've described to us?
Look, I guess I started out in a very... I have an engineering background. That's what I studied at uni, and I should have realised that when I looked at my marks that all the computing subjects were really good and everything else was okay. So after I left uni, I went and worked in engineering, and we came across a implementation, and I got involved in computing. And so when I got into the SAP space, that was purely on a functional side. And then as the years went by, I got drawn more and more towards the software, and got into the software and into development. So where I find myself now is in a kind of awkward space where sometimes it's hard for people to understand where I'm at. Am I a functional person? Am I a technical person? And I probably have got to the stage where my passion is really on the technical side. But even more importantly, I guess, as some of those development experiences, I started thinking about what makes a great team? Why do some clusters of people work well together and get great outcomes? And why do some projects fail miserably? So I started to think more and more about people and how we think of development often as being a very technical thing, that there's a guy or girl coding away and they're doing wonderful things. But the reality is that much more of this is about cooperation and communication and people. And these are all the kinds of things that we often don't naturally gravitate towards. We like the code, we like the technology part. So I guess now I found myself in a place where I'm still interested in the tech, but I'm actually more interested in how do we get groups of technology people working well together to get great outcomes. And I guess that ties partly into some of the agile stuff that we're talking about just a little earlier.
Yeah. And I guess one other thing, because of the, changing landscape that we've been having in the SAP world, and everything's rapidly changing in so many ways. And just talking about your role, in the good old days, there were very defined roles. Do you find that that's adding to the confusion and making things difficult now?
Yes, I do.
What do you call yourself nowadays?
What do I call myself nowadays? Yeah, and what does it mean? I'm not sure what it really means. And so I try and go past labels anyway, because labels really have a whole lot of values and associations with them, and we plop them on somebody's head and we say, they're a ABAPA, or they're a this, or they're a that. But those labels aren't particularly helpful. Organisationally, we do that a lot as well. So I know some organisations are truthfully still structured as if they were a project team doing their R3 implementation. The system's now running, but they're still structured that way, and they haven't really clearly thought what they're doing and whether they're structured appropriately for it and whether they have the right roles and skills. So I think it's important to distinguish between skills to operate a productively deployed solution versus the skills and setup you would need to respond to emerging business requirements and innovate against them and deploy that value quickly. There's a little bit of a tension between those setups, in my mind at least.
And perhaps if we are being more agile, we would merge those two worlds together.
We would merge those worlds, and we would have on the one side the group that says, don't change anything, it's working. Fear of disruption is very great, which tends to say don't touch anything, which I think is partly the motivation behind 3-monthly cab change cycles, because somebody thinks that means at least we have 3 months of stability. So versus those don't change anything versus the other group that wants to introduce value as early as possible, as quickly as possible, there's a tension there. And if you hold one opinion and I hold the other, that is, you want to slow down change and I want to increase change, we'll just argue till the cows come home.
Well, we know about conflict resolution, right?
Yeah, we've heard about that this morning.
And in your journey through all this, coming back to, are there particular things that have stood out that you brought with you on that journey?
Yeah, look, there are some things that stuck out and have stayed with me in that whole journey. One of them very early on, this may sound really strange to some of you, but I remembered when I was working at SAP, the first time I ever made an OSS note, made a change. I was actually really scared because going through my mind was, I'm making this change in an enormous program that I don't really understand, that I've just inherited from a guy who has left before I've arrived, and there are going to be thousands upon thousands of people out there who are going to be impacted by what I'm doing. So I was actually scared of what I was doing. That experience set in my mind the whole questions of software quality. How can we actually work so that it's not so much just that bugs don't get in or bugs can go, but understanding that there's an entire ecosystem that it might only be 3 lines of code, but the consequences and impact of that are very great and they ripple all around the place we never see. So software quality, how do we get good outcomes, became important to me. I also worked on CRM very early on, and I guess there are actually lots of arguments and opinions about what was valuable functionality. So this question of, when you're developing something, where do you start? How do you prioritize requirements? Is it the person or the customer that yells loudest, gets it in there? How do we manage that? So this whole thing about not software development from the technology side, but how do we actually go about this in an effective way that whether it's our individual customers or our clients at work, that the business is getting the best value from us as quickly as they can.
Yeah, I guess that's an ongoing thing. It's almost universal, that kind of challenge. But what do you looking, I guess, now more immediately, just coming up now in our environment, what particular challenges do you?
I see there's an enormous challenge. The challenges are somewhat similar as they've always been, but there is the challenge clearly on the technology side. If you have been there's so many things there that are being developed, so much from the technology framework, there's so much that you could learn. What do you spend your time learning? So that's a really difficult thing, because even if you're a functional person, that is, if you look at SAP applications, you can spend your entire life just understanding the potential use of the functionality that's there. So where do you start? Where do you finish? Where do you stop? It's the same for us on the technical side. There's so much there. Where do you stop? Where do you start? So I guess one of the things that when I inherited a particular group, I was helping them think through, where have you come from? What strengths do you have? What do you already know something about? What do you have a passion for? And perhaps those things will help guide or at least narrow down the areas that you might want to focus. So for me, for example, and I'm sorry to say, Al, I'm not gifted with UI, and so the thought of actually designing a mobile interface scares the living daylights out of me, because I know that I have no feel for that. Whereas I quite like services. I've always been interested in APIs. So of course, naturally for me, I spend much more time there than I'm never going to put myself out there as a user experience or a UI designer.
And from your vantage point, for developers, what's kind of happening? What technologies or things to focus on out of that? Soiree, all these things that are coming out. In particular, do you see anything that's?
I think it depends on where you're at. I guess one of the big things to recognise is that SAP has changed, I think, from being an application company that had some technology, the so-called basis, to now being a technology company that has some applications. Now, if you're working in the application space today, then it makes sense to really understand the technology that those applications are running on. So if you happen to be in an ECC landscape now and your organisation's going to S4, then it would make sense to me to understand as much as you can about that S4 HANA ecosystem that you're going to be moving into. But perhaps if you're looking at the technology landscape as a technology landscape, you may actually be developing with that and doing very little, in fact nothing, with SAP applications per se. So in that case, you'd be looking at things of going, okay, where would I go with this SAP Core platform, for example? And I get to see it very specifically. For me, things like Node are just so ubiquitous now that that would be certainly an area. Node and JavaScript is something that people really should get under their belt.
And how much do you balance, looking at more the principles behind things and, the philosophy? Lars had so many books and stuff to back up a lot of this stuff. How much do you balance that with, the hard, actual technical death stuff?
If I have a brain injury, I would like to be operated on by the best neurosurgeon that I could find. Right? I want somebody who really, really knows what they're doing and is a great technician, is able to do that as well as they can. Fortunately, most of us don't need to be operated on by neurosurgeons. We fall over and our parents will put a Band-Aid on our knee. What I look for in people when I'm perhaps interviewing them looking for roles is not so much what they know today. But at the same time, I'm really interested in what they know today, because that gives me some kind of insight into what kind of things have they learned, what kind of things have they been interested in, have they got a capacity to learn. So it's not so much what you do know today, but your ability and demonstrating ability to learn so you can adapt tomorrow. I think that's the more important thing for us.
So having some of those foundations there can help excel you with the more, technical side of things, if you've got some principles to base it on. And they're more transferable as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
So you can look at things, you can spend all your time trying to learn new obscure SAP products that come and go very quickly. People say it's a waste of time. I wasted all my time doing that, and it's gone. And but in a way, it's not a wasted time, because even though the absolute details of what you learned have disappeared, the thought concepts through many of these things keep on coming out. So if you understood Tomcat, for example, you would have had when you saw the Internet Communication Manager in the ABAP stack, you would have gone, oh yeah, I've got an idea what's happening here.
Yeah, right. Okay. So I guess some of then, if we go into the technical side, some of the buzzwords that you've mentioned, S4HANA, I guess JavaScript, one, CDS views, you hear a lot about that.
The Cloud Application Programming Model. For me, because as I said, I'm really interested in services and back-end stuff.
Is it actually getting traction, do you think, or it will this year?
I think it's going to be really big this year, especially since you can do so much with it so quickly that it's going to be decoupled away from, how do I express this? You can build things in it so quickly and demonstrate to people an application that's working well enough. It becomes a very powerful prototyping tool, even if that's not the end of the story. Yeah, so I'm really excited about the Node version of that. And I just at the moment just can't learn enough about it.
Well, it definitely looks like that's obviously the direction that it's heading. I guess I wanted to open up a little bit too to the floor and get a little bit of input as well, where people may see challenges or they see particularly where things are headed. So just have a think about that. And maybe in a minute we'll just open the floor up to that. One other question I just wanted to ask was then, when we're approaching this thing, how do we go about taking on learning new things? That's always a challenge, especially having access to new platforms, etc.
There was a time when you relied upon having to go to an SAP training course, and you'd get a big binder and somebody would do a classroom instruction for you. And that was your only source of information.
And the binder was meaningless afterwards.
And the binder was meaningless afterwards. And and as it was said earlier by Phil Martin, it had no business context there either. So it wasn't, look, it was helpful, but what my point there is, access to information meant looking to a calendar and looking to see what courses were available. I can't stress how lucky we are today with all of the resources that are available online. There was a time in SAP's history when there was nothing really meaningful online, and now there is so much available online. The developer.sap.com, the things that we heard earlier, some of the URLs that were said earlier about different places to go and see demonstration stuff, mock services that are available. YouTube has come into its own. There's some really good curated videos on there. The DJ Adams hands-on SAP Dev you'll either like it very much or you'll be driven insane by all the different rabbit holes that we go down into. But it's a great resource. Max Streifenfender's explorations in the SAP Cloud. There's a lot of really good material online, but nothing kind of really replaces having a conversation with somebody else. Yeah? And so groups like this really are very, very beneficial.
Is there any questions that anybody has, or if there's anything that people are seeing out there that actually really is, that people actually are using particular technology that's happening at the moment?
Perez.
Thank you, Andrew. I have questions about all these new dimension, artificial intelligence related technology access, say RPA, machine learning. I mean, although AWS and Azure, everybody's providing their own set of services and TensorFlow and whatnot. What is the actual market penetration? Once you look at client businesses, something like AGL or any other client, NBN, how much of it, I know NBN, I mean, from an outsider view, I know NBN has been doing some contractual roles for some guys who have been doing things on AWS. But how much of it is actually in production and being put to use? I don't know. I mean, where do you see the penetration going, and what is the current scale, and how soon do you expect it to catch up?
I really can't talk about the penetration because I really don't know. My observation is this, that a startup organization always has the advantage over an incumbent because the incumbent company always has to continue servicing its existing clients. It can't stop doing what it's doing, and it has to try and manage change at the same time. So what I mean with that answer is there are organizations out there that have existing information systems that are managing their business, sustaining their business today. It is really a very brave leadership team that says, oh, we're going to somehow kind of jettison all of that, replace it with something else, introduce all of that risk of disruption to the business, pay a lot of money, and we end up where we were, kind of thing. So for me, it's actually a very difficult question. For once an organisation has invested in their IT systems, they're almost locked into a platform of incremental improvement. It's very hard for them to make a big step change and do something completely different. It is not impossible, but it's hard. There was a wonderful conversation I had with a startup organisation in the banking area, and they were working with an organisation introducing Agile, and the bank wanted to bring about a change of culture, new ways of working with the existing team. And I remember the question I asked really clearly and his response. The question was, to what extent did you achieve changes in the way of working, or did you actually build a parallel group working alongside the existing? And he thought for a while and he said, we actually built a parallel group, and that parallel group spun off and became a new branch of our organisation completely. And they built a new product, different platforms in the banking area, and left the legacy behind. Not that the legacy was bad, but the legacy was become constraining. So when you talk about cloud adoption and taking advantage of all the things that we can possibly take advantage of today, I think some of the real things that hold back adoption aren't necessarily lack of understanding, but really how do we achieve business continuity and business benefit in that transition.
One of the things I might throw in there is if you're looking at this plethora of all these possible things you can look into, machine learning is one niche and can seem quite far-fetched. There's a lot of, it's often it seems like we're just trying to make up problems to solve, like just because we've got this cool tech. Same with IoT, it sort of seems like, we're just trying to come up with these scenarios, but I think definitely the interest is out there and the technology is building, and it's something that you really have passion for and energy. Potentially that's just a way that you can, that might drive you on to invest your own time to learn it. And if you can demonstrate that you can do something with it, I think that has potential. But yeah, once again, I think it would be good to get some sources. I don't know where you get that, if anyone knows sources of actual adoption, maybe from SAP, if they would release that kind of information. I don't know, they might not want to, but that would be the ultimate thing to get a pulse on where to head. Anyone else?
Thanks, Ben. Andrew, I've recently finished a role doing slow data development for a government client, and those data would be consumed by applications where they use Angular for the front-end development, so non-SAP product.
Yep.
I'm just curious, what's your Jemena roadmap for custom developments in that area?
I'm really not comfortable publicly talking about Jemena's roadmap. I'm happy to have a conversation with you later about specific questions you might have. Having said that, Jemena is on a journey of digital transformation, and with a new CEO, our CDO, Chief Digital Officer, is really keen on trying to drive benefit realization. So we've had an organisation that has been very strongly focused, in the last few years at least, upon supporting and sustaining our productively deployed solutions. There are many changes happening in our business, and there's a real drive to be able to improve customer experience. And so some of the things that have been pain points for us are now getting the attention that they deserve. And we've got a lovely process now of restructuring our digital team so that we have very strong and clear engagement with business stakeholders. So they know exactly who they should be talking to. The roll-in process has become much clearer, and there's a great openness now to do things differently than we have in the past. Now, how effective we'll be at doing that remains to be seen, but I can look at an organisation like AGL and knowing where they were in their digital journey and where they've come to, and I can see the capability of organisations to move and transform and do good things. So there's no forbidden technology at Jemena. There's nothing that says you must use something from the SAP catalogue. We have a team of Java developers who have been developing in Java and moving into UI areas, and they've been delighted to understand that, the SAP system can actually give us an OData service. Right? So, I mean, they're on the same floor, they're not terribly far from each other, but the assumption from that team that actually did some front-end through to back-end Java development was that getting anything out of SAP was incredibly difficult. And if it wasn't RFC, then what do we do? So the fact that there is the ability for them to learn that SAP had a internet communication manager in the ABAP stack was all new to them. And it is 2020, but some of that conversation amongst different teams is opening up now abilities to respond to innovation within the organisation. But we've got a long way to go.
I think we'll wrap it up there. It's been a long day.
It is a long day.
It's been excellent, jam-packed, so thanks very much, Andrew.
Thank you, Ben.
I'll hand over to Phil, and I just want to say also thanks heaps to Phil.
Yes, indeed. Well done.
Thank you.